the radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Yaron Brook Show on this Sunday afternoon. I hope you're having a great weekend, and thanks for joining me. It's not what I'd expect everybody to be doing on a weekend. There's a lot of stuff to do. This football, for example. I don't know how many of you watch football, but obviously you guys are not. You're listening here, so thank you. I appreciate that. I like having a live audience. I think you can tell. I think this would be a lot harder for me to do just as a podcast with no live audience. So even though I don't read all the comments and I don't follow everything that's going on live, just the idea that there are people listening live and responding live makes this easier and more fun for me to do. All right, today we're going to primarily turn to economics. Two things I want to talk about. Two separate things. I guess there's some relationship, but two separate things. One is central banks. They've been, particularly the Fed, has been in the news over the last week with, buying up with the idea now that they're going to buy up $60 billion of treasuries every month, starting soon, and everything that's happened in the what's called the repo market. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll explain that. And we'll just talk about central banks broadly, not the history, but what they're trying to do and why it's all messed up. Then I want to talk about wages and productivity, and I'm going to show you a graph that you can see everywhere, a graph that people are using all the time, a graph that the left brings up regularly. I'd say, Trump supporters bring it up periodically as well, but primarily the left. And I'm going to offer a thorough debunking of the graph and why it's much worse than the hockey stick, climate change graph, which is nonsense from what I can tell as well. So graphs are very powerful. Pictures are not arguments, but people use them as argument. Graphs are used as arguments all the time because they appear scientific, because they look scientific, and everybody can understand a graph. Two lines, they go in particular directions. Everybody thinks they can understand, but unless you read the footnotes, you have no clue. So we're going to look at a graph, one of the most popular economic graphs today, used constantly by the left, and we're going to look at it and try and dissect and figure out what's actually going on. But before we do that, I want to talk about just 5 minutes. Give me 5 minutes to talk about Greta. Because as I expected, I think I started the show yesterday by saying I'm going to get in trouble. Those who like Greta and those who hate Greta, everybody's gonna hate me now. And it turned out to be true. It turns out I am a fan of Greta's, according to some on the internet. I have favorably compared her to Joan of Arc. I guess Joan of Arc, for these people, was a heroine. I'm suffering from, Jimmy wrote that I'm suffering from such a case of Trump derangement syndrome that I finally broken. I am now broken. And how could I not see that she can be used as propaganda? Did I say that she's not being used as propaganda? I mean, it's unbelievable to me how non-objective people have become. Maybe they always were like this, but again, somebody asked me yesterday about becoming more pessimistic over the last year, and this is why. Because of the extent that, what I've observed is how people have become completely and utterly non-objective. No relation. So the correct attitude, according to my critics, towards Greta should be, she's a tool of the left, therefore she is evil. We don't even understand anything about what she says, how she says it, why she's popular. She's popular because she's a tool of the left. And she's being manipulated by external forces that have control over us. And they're leftists, so There's no reason to understand them. There's no reason to study them. There's no reason to find arguments against them because they're leftists. There's no point in arguing with them. Really, the only thing you can do with leftists is shoot them, I guess. Shoot them. It reminds me that, I did a show on Pinochet, the shooting stuff. I did a show on Pinochet a while ago. And I said, Pinochet implemented these positive economic policies. And I said something like, in spite of the fact that he killed thousands of people. He wasn't a good guy. He was a bad guy because he killed thousands of people. And somebody in the comments said, and I think they got some likes, well, but he killed leftists. So what? I mean, that's where we are. We are where people who call themselves objectivists think that force is okay against those who disagree with them. Then in a free society, we still live in a semi-free society at least, let's just shoot the people we disagree with. We don't have to understand them. We don't have to, we shouldn't reason. We shouldn't try to figure out what makes them popular. We shouldn't try to figure out why Greta is such good propaganda, why she's so successful. Of course she's being used as propaganda. The people whose ideas she supports are using her. Well, of course. Why does that surprise everybody? But why is it effective? That's important to know. And my point yesterday was it's effective because it has a certain moral certainty, moral passion associated with it. And I think that while she's being used as propaganda, I think she knows exactly what she's doing. And I think she is, again, Asperger's. They're very, very focused. She's focused on this stuff. She's read all the scientific articles, and she believes this stuff. Mike says, Greta is a tool of the left. Hitler used children as tools also. It didn't turn out well for him. So what are you saying? You're saying the left is just Hitler and they're going to all die in a bunker committing suicide? What is that? What does one thing have to do with the other? Yeah, Greta is a tool of the left. Yeah, Hitler did use children. But isn't it interesting to figure out why Hitler, for example, let's take Hitler. Why skip over Hitler? Let's take Hitler. Isn't it interesting to figure out why Hitler managed to take a country like Germany, civilized, supposedly, cultured, supposedly, and turn it into a barbaric culture that it became? Isn't that important to know? Isn't that important to understand? Objectivism has a particular theory of what moves history. And that theory is that history is moved by ideas, not by the left, not by Hitler, not by Greta, but by the ideas that animate them. It's important to understand what those ideas are. What are the ideas that make Greta popular? Or is she just popular because everybody's being brainwashed? Really? Do you even know what brainwashing is and how you would brainwash somebody? People have not been brainwashed. People have been fed a bunch of lies, but they still have a mind that they can use to study, to figure out that those aren't lies. Most of you, not all of you obviously, but most of you have that capacity. That's not brainwashing. That's our standard educational system. It's just not a brainwashing system. It's a bad system, and it teaches people lies, but it's telling them, not brainwashing them, repeating it over and over again. Isn't it interesting to figure out why people so easily accept those lies? Why people, even when faced with contradictory information, still embrace the lies? Don't reject them? We'll get to the productivity wages graph, and you'll see the same phenomena there. People are being lied to constantly. Why don't they question the lies? Why is nobody standing up to the lies? Why are the people standing up to lies not as effective as the liars? Those are all important things to figure out. Ron has put up a Facebook post. Whoops, it's disappeared, so there it is. Which basically says that I'm completely lost it because I think Greta Thunberg is a Joan of Arc of our time. Now, I do, in a sense that I explained yesterday, but I don't consider Joan of Arc a good person. I don't consider Joan of Arc a heroic person. She was a nut who bought into lies, deluded herself into believing she was a messenger of God. And I'm sure Joan of Arc too. You think Joan of Arc wasn't being used? Of course she was being used. You think the clergy, the church, didn't use Joan of Arc for their own purposes? She's not a heroic figure. She's a girl being used for religious purposes and for nationalist purposes. Does objectivism take a side on who should have won that war? Was Joan of Arc on the right side, on the wrong side? It's absurd. But Joan of Arc used moral arguments to guilt people into behaving in a particular way that supported her agenda. So does Greta. Isn't that interesting? And what's more interesting is, why do people feel guilty? Why does this work? I pointed out that altruism has a big play. That is ideas, moral ideas. Moral ideas play a big role in this. And if we're going to combat those ideas, then we better understand the morality that drives the ideas and combat that. Instead of just saying, well, it's the left, it's obviously false. That'll get you far in life. That'll get you nowhere in the battle to save Western civilization. So it's stunning that in the world we live in today, to try to analyze the enemy, to try to understand them, so that one can fight them, so that one can combat them, so that one can be victorious over them, is unthinkable to some people. And they do this in the name of, and this is what's creepy, and this is why I'm so pessimistic. They do this in the name of objectivism. They do this in the name of objectivism. I mean, this is why Ayn Rand insisted that objectivism is not whatever I say it is, not whatever you say it is, not whatever is out there. Objectivism is Ayn Rand's philosophy. To know objectivism, read Ayn Rand. Don't listen to Ron. Don't listen to me. Go read Ayn Rand. That's objectivism. I'm just Yaron, speaking for myself, presenting what I believe is the best interpretation of what's going on in the world today based on the ideas of objectivism. But you shouldn't believe me. You should go read objectivism. I'm just me. I'm not even the Ayn Rand Institute. The show is not the Ayn Rand Institute. The show doesn't represent objectivism, it represents me. I think I'm pretty good at interpreting objectivism and applying it to the events of the day. But, Ayn Rand was a genius. I'm not. And she might come back and say, you're nuts, Yaron, you're all wrong. And, I completely acknowledge that that is a possibility. But you guys, my critics, you are at best conservatives. But you're not even good conservatives to the extent that such a thing exists. You're mindless, unthinking conservatives who are motivated by nothing but hate. You're like leftists, nihilists, who all they care about is slamming the left, slamming those you disagree with. You have no positives to offer the world. You have no ideas to offer the world. You are just empty vessels of hatred. And in that sense, you remind me a lot of the left. And I'm sorry to get personal, but the question about pessimism yesterday pissed me off. Not the question, not the questionnaire, but the realization of the fact that I'm pessimistic because of the creeps who use Ayn Rand's name, and this is what really angers me, Ayn Rand's names, to peddle anti-philosophical, hatred for the sake of hatred, based on emotion, lack of all objectivity, and they use Ayn Rand to do all that. That is creepy and unthinkable. All right. So, those of you who do this, you're leftists. You're in the same place as the leftists. You've adopted the same nihilism as the leftist. You just hate different people than the left hates. But your motivation is still hatred. Your motivation is still fear. Greta is afraid. She truly is afraid. She believes the world is going to end. She's going to be shocked when it isn't. You are just afraid. You're afraid because you look around the world and your ideas are losing. And instead of trying to figure out why they're losing, and instead of supporting the right ideas in order to reverse the losses, fear has paralyzed you. You've abandoned philosophy, you've abandoned ideas, and instead, you have become what you hate about the left. Anti-philosophical nihilists. All right, let's get on to a different negative topic. We could go on and on with this. There's a lot to say about this issue, but the issue, the fundamental issue here, is that the battle we are facing is a philosophical battle. It's an epistemological battle. It's a battle against mysticism for a reason. It's a battle against pseudoscience in the name of science. It's a battle against altruism in the name of egoism. It's a battle against collectivism in the name of individualism, and a battle against statism in the name of capitalism. And when I say in the name of, what that means is you have to fight for the positive. And if you realize that what motivates Greta and what motivates those who are using her is altruism, collectivism, fear, ignorance, then you've got a starting point. Then you know what needs to be done. What needs to be done is to advocate for reason over pseudoscience, for the knowledge of facts over mythology. Fight for egoism over the guilt-ridden altruism that so dominates the world around us. And fight for freedom over the statism and all the status solutions that everybody seems to have when it comes to facing any kind of problem. Any kind of problem. And until we're ready to do that, we're not going to make a dent. And that's the source of my pessimism. There's just not a lot of us willing to actually do it. Willing to actually take on the battle. Take on the fight. Actually stand up. Not, ooh, I hate you. Ooh, I've got a bunch of bad things to say about you. I mean, that's cheap and easy. That's Fox News. That's most of these idiotic commentators. That's the left. But how many people are willing to stand up and analyze the bad ideas and offer an alternative? Until there are hundreds of those, thousands of those, we lose. Deep breath. All right, let's talk about central banks. I'm not going to spend a lot of time getting deep into the economics here, partially because I think most of the audience out there is not that interested, partially because I've talked about central banks before and I've done whole courses and whole analysis of finance, partially because, hell, I don't understand what the central banks are doing today. And I don't know what the consequences are. But I want to talk about the absurdity of what they're trying to do. The absurdity of what they think they're trying to do. The absurdity of looking to them for solutions, which is happening all the time. And I want to emphasize their utter incompetence. And the fact that they're incompetent is proven over and over and over again. Almost every few weeks, there's something that happens out there that proves how incompetent the Federal Reserve or central bankers are. And what is the solution? What is the solution that everybody comes up with? Well, give them more power. Or we need to replace the people. We need to improve the institution. We need to do the central banking a little bit differently. And there's nobody, or almost nobody, who is willing to say, stop. This institution has been a failure from day one. Why can't we question its very existence? And not in a conspiratorial way like Ron Paul and some libertarians do it. Oh, it's controlled by those evil bankers, New York bankers. You know they want to say Jewish and they just hold themselves. Not in a sense that it's some private conspiratorial entity that's trying to take over the world or manipulate all our lives. No. A simple argument that does it make sense? And doesn't, from purely economic perspective for a second, does it make sense to have an institution that monopolizes the production of money, that monopolizes all decision making with regard to money and interest rates, that indeed determines the most important price in our entire economy? The price of time, the price of money, which is interest. Given the track record, put aside everything else, given the track record, shouldn't we be thinking of alternative solutions? Shouldn't we be thinking of other ways of doing this? It doesn't work. I mean, we saw just the latest example of this was a few weeks ago. I talked about this on one of the shows, where the repo market, this short-term lending market that banks participate in, that corporations participate in, the short-term market went completely out of whack a few weeks ago. And the Federal Reserve, interest rates, the Federal Reserve has set short-term interest rates at between 2 and 2.25%. And suddenly, on very short-term loans, banks were charging 5 to 10%. 5 to 10% on annualized, of course, on very short-term loans. Now, the central bank didn't see this coming. They didn't even think it was going to happen. They weren't prepared for it. And in spite of all their efforts, to stabilize financial markets, it still happened. And they stepped in and they became the borrower. And everybody said, well, what's this going to do? Nobody exactly knows what it's going to do. Nobody knows why interest rates shot through the roof. It could be that there's certain regulations that restrict the amount of liquidity, how many reserves the banks have, and therefore the banks didn't have enough extra liquidity, to lend money out. But if it's just a technical thing like that, why didn't the Federal Reserve see it coming? It could be, and this is maybe Republicans and Donald Trump's debt. We're running a deficit of $1 trillion now. The government has to borrow $1 trillion every year, an additional $1 trillion every year, in order to fund all this. So is it finally the debt manifesting itself in some visible problems in the financial markets? Yeah, probably. But again, none of that is a secret. Why didn't the Fed see it? Because it can't. There's a general understanding in economics that central planning doesn't work. That you don't want to put central planners in charge of a complex supply chain. That if central planners managed the Apple supply chain, it would be an unmitigated disaster. But then why? Why? And indeed, you know, Nixon's experiment with price controls, government setting prices, in the early 1970s was a disaster. Everybody gets it. Everybody appreciates it. And that's true of economists, and that's true of the general public. But why, oh why, is it that when it comes to the most important price in our economy, in my view, the price of money, the price of time, money over time, interest rates, we have full faith and trust in central planners to do it, in spite of all the evidence, Great Depression caused by the Fed, financial crisis in 2007-8 caused by the Fed, inflation in the 70s caused by the Fed. I would argue much of the stagnation that we've experienced probably caused by the Fed. And generally, everybody's complaining about the economy, even as the economy supposedly is doing really well under Trump. It's not really. You see that in everybody's constant complaints and constant. It's not really doing that well. I mean, it's going at 2-point-something%. I mean, that's pretty pathetic for a president who's already cut corporate taxes by a significant amount. Best thing he did, maybe. Took us out of the Paris Accord, don't have that. We're deregulating in certain aspects of the economy. The economy should be growing at 3-4%. 4 maybe. Why is it only growing at 2-something? Well, part of that is the Fed. Part of it is government spending. Part of it is the fact that Donald Trump has done nothing, and the Republicans have done nothing to shrink government. They've expanded government. And the fact is that deregulation is too minor to have a dramatic impact. It's just not significant enough. It's not big enough. It's not substantial enough. And it's not permanent enough. And, of course, let's not forget, tariffs and all the trade nonsense has really hurt economic growth over the last couple of years. But why do we let the Fed, why does nobody question this? Why is it just a given that the Fed needs to do this? We need a Fed to manage the economy. We're told constantly. Even though in America, at least, we generally have a sense that we don't need to manage the economy in other aspects. So, you know, if I show an audience my iPhone and I say, what do you think this would look like if the government, you know, designed it and manufactured it? Everybody laughs, everybody gets it. But the most important economic function out there, the one that has the most systemic risk, is handed over to central planners, not just here, but in Europe. Look at what Europe is going through. Literally today, if you want to borrow money, if the government wants to borrow money, it borrows money at a negative interest rate. Negative interest rate. The theory of finance says that is impossible. No one would ever say, here, I'll pay you to take my money. That's what a negative interest rate means. I'll pay you to take my money. It is a complete unending of financial logic. It is a complete and utter rejection of the basic laws of economics. It doesn't stop the central bankers from doing it. It doesn't stop central bankers from doing it. Today we have negative interest rates in much of Europe. We have negative interest rates in Japan. I mean, the damage the negative interest rates have to do to an economy. And I don't know how exactly, what the damage is exactly. It's so impossible because of the complexity of the system to trace out and point, oh, right here, this is where the damage is. But it does to the very notion of what money is, to the very notion of what debt is, to the very notion of what lending is. It destroys that notion. I'm paying you to take my money. No rational person would ever do that. And yet, they are. Because in some sense, they're being incentivized, motivated forced to participate in this scheme. And there are no critics. Quite the contrary. You know, the guy leaving the central bank of the European Central Bank now, he's retiring, has said that everything he's done, has not resulted in what he wanted to result. He wants 2% inflation. It's a magic number. Came out of the skies, 2%. 2%. Hasn't been able to produce 2% inflation. So what he suggests now is what they call helicopter money. See, the problem has always been, this is also what people who are worried about inequality want. See, the problem with the way they do it now is the way they inject money into the economy is they inject the money into the economy. The way you want to inject money into the economy is through the banking system. And if it goes through the banking system, and this is an old idea that goes back a long, long time, when you inject money through the financial system, the people that first get enriched by that money, the people who most benefit from that money, are the people in finance. That money primarily flows into financial products and financial institutions. Stock markets go up, bond markets go up, financial instruments benefit from that money, and the rest of us don't see that money ultimately. And you can see that with the amount of money that have been, in a sense, printed since the financial crisis. Stock markets have gone up. Prices have not, because it's never reached us. It's gone into the stock market and then into what I call bank reserves. The nice thing about helicopter money, in a sense, giving everybody money, not just through the financial system, is we all get the money. We all benefit, and we all go and consume, and then we get inflation. And they want inflation for some reason. They want the value of the money to decline every year. They don't want you to, the other thing that negative interest rates do is, what incentive do they give you? Well, the incentive is not to save, not to invest. Now, what does not saving and not investing do? It means, what are you going to do with the money? You're going to consume. Now, if you don't save and you don't invest, what does that do to an economy? Well, it means there's no capital. There's no capital for long-term economic growth. Long-term economic growth is determined by saving. So how have we had long-term economic growth if in the United States, for example, we haven't saved for a long time, partially because of the artificially low interest rate that the Fed has provided us? Well, we benefited from the fact that the Chinese do save. And the fact that the Chinese and the Japanese and Asians generally in the past have saved, Japanese are no longer savers, they're net consumers now, but in the past have saved has done what? They have then taken their savings and invested it in the United States. And that has provided the fuel for long-term economic growth. And how have they done that? How have they invested in the U.S.? Well, by exporting to us, getting dollars, taking those dollars, which are their savings. So they take the savings, they invest in manufacturing, which is then exports to us. They get dollars, and they use the dollars to invest with us, which is a massive net benefit to the United States. And now we want to do away with that. We want them not to be net exporters to us. We want them to be net importers or balance the budget, the trade deficit, according to Trump. But what negative interest rates or artificially low interest rates do is what they do is they actually cause us to not save. They reduce dramatically the incentive to save. And they increase the incentive to consume, with the idea that consumption is what drives the economy. But that is an ancient economic fallacy. It's production that drives an economy. It's work that drives an economy. Now, Keith says, I do my saving in gold and silver. That's not saving. That's much more like hoarding. Because The gold and silver don't add to production. Gold and silver just maintain the value of your money. Saving an investment about earning an actual return on your investment. You get an interest rate. And why do you get an interest rate? Because the person you are lending the money to, the person you're investing the money with, is using that money for productive purposes that generate a higher return than what they're giving you. By putting your money in gold and silver, that's fine. I'm not against that. I'm just saying it's not saving. Not in the economic sense. Not in the sense that saving produce production, produce economic growth. So the low interest rate environment, the fear that induces people to go into gold and silver, the negative interest rates, produce negative saving rates. People are consuming their savings and lead to long-term slow economic growth. Wow, I'm shocked. Isn't that what we have in the West today? Almost no economic growth? Yeah. And Trump hasn't changed that. So, two things I think are dragging down economic growth in the United States. One is massive government spending. Now, I know some of you think, some of you cannot think that you have to find a justification for everything Trump does. You have to find a rationale for everything he does because he is God. So he must have a reason for all he does. It's like what God tells to Job. Don't question me. If I did something, I had a rationale. Well, you guys will never question Trump. Everything he does has to have a rationale. So you find the 4D chess. And here the rationale is that he wanted to build up the military. Why exactly, I don't know, because the military spends a fortune inefficiently, ineffectively, wastefully. The defense budget could be cut dramatically and be much more effective if it was funneled in the right direction. But in order to get a bigger defense budget, he had to compromise and give in to the Democrats massive spending. Now, note, we're spending more now than under Obama. The deficit now is bigger than under Obama, except for the 1 year where Obama did the $1 trillion stimulus. Really? That's the best deal Donald Trump, the deal maker, could make? Is to spend like there's no tomorrow? That spending is crippling the U.S. economy. Plus, the artificially low interest rates, those two things are completely crippling economic growth. Oh, but unemployment's very low. That's true. The labor participation rate is not particularly high. Unemployment rate, we always used to be very skeptical of the unemployment rate when Obama used to report it. Right? Every time he'd report better numbers, we go, oh, well, Trump used to do this, and everybody on the right used to do, oh, well, we don't really believe that number. It's not really a real number. But now that it's a Trump number, it's a good number. It's exactly the same calculation, and it's not that good. It wasn't for Obama, and it's not for Trump. Labor participation rate has ticked up a little bit, but not much. No, the reason Trump signed a deal with the Democrats, or cut a deal with the Democrats to allow them to spend like there's no tomorrow, the reason Republicans went along with it is because they have no clue, because they don't really care, because they want big government, because they don't understand economics. They have no clue about economics. Certainly Trump has no clue about economics. And Republicans, they don't want to fight the fight. They don't want to fight the fight. So we've got a group of people, central planners, central bankers, who are central planners, that we've just accepted as central planners and superior central planners. And nobody questions them. And again, the question is why? Well, part of it is just the inertia. And part of it's just, it is what it is. We've had central bankers for, you'd think forever, but for, 80 years? And it's just what it is. And all their failures, well, we just need to get better people. We need better algorithms. We need better statistics. We need better theories. People have a really, really hard time challenging the status quo. I mean, that is true. And economists are the same. I mean, it's not easy to get published in an academic journal in economics if you're going to advocate for abandoning central banking. It's just not a popular thing to do. And by the way, does anybody know who the largest employer of economists is in the world? Who is the largest employer of economists? If you're getting an economics PhD and you want a job, who is the largest employer in the world of economists? Well, it's the Federal Reserve, the US central bank. And my guess is in Europe, the European Central Bank is the largest employer over there. But the Fed is the largest employer of economists. So you don't want to write a bunch of papers pissing off the Fed because you might need a job. So the central planners, so the economists don't want to question it. It's also, again, there's only one school of economics that completely, utterly rejects the idea of central planning, and that's the Austrian school. Even Chicago is often associated with central planning of one form or another. Even Milton Friedman, for most of his life, argued for central bank, for monetarism, which is a particular view of central banking, and a particular view of how to run a central bank, do a better job running a central bank. But until only in the last few years of his life did he start questioning the existence of central bank. So it's only the Austrians who are willing to question, and there aren't a lot of them. And the fact is, it's unappealing. Because while generally we kind of trust markets, the culture, kind of generally, but we're squirming about them. We don't really trust them. We want them to be regulated. We want them to be controlled. I mean, even pro-free market people want tech companies to be broken up. There's a real distrust of markets in the world in which we live. I mean, I think the root of that is morality. We don't trust self-interest. Business is self-interested. Markets are motivated by self-interest. They're motivated by a desire to make a profit for yourself, by a desire to produce for yourself. That is a desire that is completely unacceptable morally in the culture in which we live. So we don't trust markets. And the most important market, we all know, is finance. At least I know. I've tried to explain over time. It is what fuels all the other markets. It was makes all other markets possible. It's why when you cripple finance with Dodd-Frank, when you cripple finance with the central bank, it functions less effectively. And when it functions less effectively, economic growth suffers. Suffers. So our economic growth, employment, wages, wealth creation, all suffer because we have a central bank and we have heavy regulations on banks. But we love those regulations. And we love the central banks because the one thing we despise more than anything else, the one business type we despise more than any other is the private banker. Because he's the most selfish of all of them. He is about making money from money. And if you're interested in this idea of why we despise bankers more than anyone else, I highly recommend my book, The Moral Case, In Pursuit of Wealth, The Moral Case for Finance. In Pursuit of Wealth, The Moral Case for Finance. So we tolerate central bankers who are massively distorting the markets in which we live, massively manipulating our behavior, and massively causing us real damage. Why do I get so upset? I get so upset because I know what's possible. I know. I can imagine what an alternative world in which we are free looks like. And just from the material perspective, how rich we could be. How rich we could be. And as a finance guy, how many innovations we'd have. How productive we would become. how many possibilities we all would have, how many job options each one of us would face. It is truly unbelievable how much we are losing. How much we are losing by just the simple regulation of our financial industries. And we don't know it. It's the unseen that we are losing. It's not like somebody's taking something away from you. It's what you've never had. The flying car you can only imagine. This super duper wealth that you can only fantasize about. It's just hard to imagine what life would be like. And I know that. I know that with every fiber of my body. I know how much worse life is today than it could be. Because of the central planners, because of the altruists, because we don't trust businessmen. Why do I defend businessmen? Almost to the point of ridicule by many, right? Because, libertarians at least tell me how corrupt businessmen are. Because businessmen are the source of the wealth that we have. And the regulations, the statism, are all there to cripple those businessmen. And even though they're all mixed, even though some of them do bad things, they are the heroes we must protect. That is the profession that makes the our material being possible. Now, how you would actually get rid of central banks, I mean, it's a technical question. It's not that hard to do if you really wanted to do it. You could do it in one term of a presidency. I mean, you would do something. You would move to a gold standard first by setting a date by which the price of gold would be the conversion price. And then at that point, you set gold, and then you would basically start dismantling the Fed and and it's easy. You allow private banks to issue currency backed to beginning by gold, and then you release that and say they can back it by anything they want, as long as it's transparent, as long as no fraud is being committed. All right, here's a bunch of questions. Are the central banks immoral? Their policies hurt poorest people the most. I know they believe growth will solve all inequalities they are causing, but is this true? So yes, central banks are immoral, but they're not immoral because they hurt the poorest people the most. That's altruism. The standard morality is not what happens to the poor people. I don't know who poor people are. Central planners are immoral. Central banks are immoral because they hurt the productive people the most. They hurt all productive people. They hurt your ability to save as a middle class person for retirement. They hurt business people's ability to plan long term because prices are all distorted by an interest rate that doesn't reflect reality. Everything about it hurts productive people. It doesn't matter to me whether it hurts somebody poor, somebody rich. That's not the standard of ethics. The standard of morality is, does it hurt the virtuous? And yeah, in this context, the virtuous are the productive, and the productive are being hurt. You got to get rid of this notion that morality is, the standard of morality is what does it do to the weakest, to the needy. It's not an issue. It's not a moral issue. Now, what central bankers are doing is hurting all of us, some more than others. But it's not about poverty or not poverty, because remember, the poor are also getting redistributed. Wealth is being redistributed in their favor. So what is the net effect to all of us? I don't know. But everybody who is productive, everybody cares about the future, everybody who's planning for the future, everybody who has a long-term horizon is hurt by central bankers. Does it make sense to believe in the US dollar since it isn't backed by gold? Do we need to go back to gold? Well, what does it mean to believe in the US dollar? The US dollar is legal tender. You believe in it because you know that you can walk into the local store and they'll take it because they have no choice. Because legally, they have to take it. That is the law of the land. Is the US dollar bad because it's not backed by anything? Yeah, it loses value every year. It easily is manipulated through the Federal Reserve by printing money or not printing money randomly or by some bogus economic theory. It is detached from reality. See, yes, do we need to go back to gold? Yes, or something. Let the market determine what that thing is. I think it's gold. Because that will ground money in reality. Right now, money is not grounded in reality. Money is grounded by the Fed's economic predictions, charts, theories that are pretty bad given everything going on in the world and the fact that they continuously are tinkering and manipulating. Yeah, we need to go back to a standard. But more importantly than going back to a standard is we need to free up interest rates, money, banking from central planning. We need to go to a free banking system. I encourage you to read George Selgin and Larry White books on free banking. We need to go to a system of banking where there's no Federal Reserve, where the government does not print money, but the government is not a monetary entity. Yeah, I need to be careful here. So some countries don't have Federal Reserve, but then the government just prints the money. No, the government directly does it, not through a central bank. Central bank is government, but they don't do it through a central bank. They do it directly. That's not better. That's worse. By the way, there are two Larry Whites, Lawrence Whites, in the economics profession. The one I'm referring to is at George Mason University. There's another one at New York University. This one's at George Mason University. So it's it's not even going back to gold. It's freeing up the banking system, allowing for competition so that we figure out what the right interest rate is. We figure out what the right way to back money is. What was the rationale behind establishing the Fed at the time it was created? Wow. That's a big story. But basically, it was to bring stability to the U.S. economy, to avoid the kind of financial crises that the United States saw in 1907. But really, in my view, it's to prevent financiers like J.P. Morgan from having too much influence. It's to, what happened in 1907 is basically J.P. Morgan saved the U.S. economy through his intervention, through his getting the bankers together and forcing a solution. And politicians felt like they should be the ones doing that. They should be the ones to save the economy. Of course, they caused the crisis. It's the variety of different things the government did to cause the crisis. And the way they set up the banking system pre-1907 led to the crisis. But it's the fact that J.P. Morgan saved the world. The private enterprise saved the world. A private banker saved the world, not the politicians. And they wanted more power. So at the end of the day, the reason the Fed was set up was to give the political class, to give politicians much more power over us, much more power over the economy. That was the real reason. The rationale was to bring more stability to this economy. Of course, they got the stability, right? They got 1913, you got the Fed. 16, 17 years later, you got a Fed-caused Great Depression. That's the stability you got. And during the late 1920s, you got a Fed-created bubble, which burst. So the Fed was a disaster almost from decade one. Why does the Fed target 2% inflation? Aren't stable or even falling prices always desirable? Well, ideally, in a free market, you'd probably get falling prices. And we do. Even today, and the reason they can't reach 2% is that you get falling prices. Think computers, think televisions, think almost everything that has to do with technology. The only items that really see dramatic increases in prices are those where the government is heavily involved, where the government is the buyer, if you will. So ideally, you'd have stable to falling prices, or whatever the market would have. You might have short periods of inflation when the monetary base, let's say, has a shock to the supply, but generally you would have declining prices. Why do they want 2%? Because they associate declining prices with the collapse of credit, what they call deflation, which they associate with recessions and depressions. And they can't disentangle, for some bizarre reason, again, they're not being honest here, they can't disentangle the question of deflation caused by banks going bust and nobody borrowing and lending from one another versus deflation caused by increases in productivity where prices are declining because we're just being more productive and our dollars can buy more. They can't disentangle that. So they associated declining prices with depressions. Why 2%? Because that's what the models tell them is a steady economic growth. The models, I think, are worse probably than the climate models. I think the economic models are worse, less predictive, with less predictive power than the climate models. Many of you know the value of climate models, close to zero. Most of these economic models, the value is negative. They're just pathetic. But that's what the models tell them. That's what they use. Okay. If a multi-billionaire wanted to go into business of short-term loans to banks, what hurdles would he face? If a multi-billionaire wanted to go into the business of short-term loans to banks, I don't think he'd face any hurdles. I mean, a lot of corporations make loans to banks, short-term loans to banks. But there's no money to be made there because basically short-term loans, the interest rates on short-term loans are basically dictated by the Fed. So how can you make any money on 2 to 2.25% annualized return? Why would you do that? And you'd have to develop an expertise because you have the risk that the bank can't pay you back. So there's just no way, I think, to actually, I mean, why would anybody go into that business when the competition is the central bank and the central bank is willing to give those loans out much cheaper than any rational human beings would do? So they undercut you, they underprice you every single time. All right, I'm going to take these two last questions, and actually I'm going to leave the wages and productivity for tomorrow. I'll do that tomorrow evening. The next show is at 8 o'clock tomorrow night, East Coast time, and I'll do that. And we'll talk a little bit about the Business Roundtable's decision about, what do you call it, stakeholder capitalism, stakeholder wealth. By the way, to dismantle the Federal Reserve, you would not only have to have a president who wanted to do it, you would have to have a Congress who wanted to do it. And to have a Congress who wanted to do it, you would have an electorate who wanted to do it. You'd have to have a significant amount of people in the economics profession who wanted to do it. You would have to have a real big consensus, not consensus, but a significant number of people, not even a majority necessarily, but a large number of people who are pushing for this. All political change requires that people accept it. People agree with it. At least a significant minority of people agree with it. And for that, you need a significant number of intellectuals to agree with it. Particularly anything radical and revolutionary. Okay, two last questions. Has oppression against women completely disappeared in the West? Or do you still see room for improvement? So, first, it's funny, but when I did a show about Manon, the opera, a little while ago, and I talked about the fact that women were oppressed in the West for forever, really, until the rise of capitalism. I was harangued by people who said, "Oh no, women had it easy. It's, men are the ones who had to go to war, and men are the ones who went out to go and have to do this physical labor, and men are the ones who had to do all this stuff. I mean, that is such BS. Right? Men are the ones who often got us into stupid wars. Most of the wars they went to fight were not wars to defend their women, were wars to capture other people's women. Wars are stupid. And are driven by collectivistic ideology. They're not there to protect women. And yeah, men got out and about, which is much more interesting than staying at home all day. In a world where physical labor is the only way to make a living, men dominated. Women couldn't own property. They couldn't inherit anything. They couldn't join guilds. They couldn't be artists. They weren't allowed. I mean, study history. Study history. I mean, Camille Piglia is wrong if she views it that way. Somebody said that's her view. Now, it's true that life sucked for everybody back then. But as we were coming out of that, and there were suddenly interesting jobs for men, and suddenly interesting things to do, and opportunities and wealth creation, women were excluded from that. Purposefully excluded for that. They weren't allowed to do it. And I talked about that when I talked about Manon, the opera. Now that has changed, dramatically changed, and that's a good thing that it's changed. Not a bad thing that it's changed. It's a good thing that women today can earn as much as men because they can work the kind of jobs that can earn them as much as men. They can be as productive as men, not in every profession, but in many professions, most professions. I mean, it's astounding to me that there are men out there, many men out there, unfortunately, and this is part of this irrationality that's made me be pessimistic lately, that view women as a threat. Now, it's true. The left has gone nuts, and a lot of public policy is nuts, and there's a certain attitude towards coming out of universities towards women and that's anti-male. All right, avoid those kind of women. But the idea that the majority of women believe that, I think is ludicrous. But there seems to be a significant number of men out there who hate women, resent women, fear women, particularly successful women, particularly women who make money. I mean, luckily we live in the 21st century in which competition is about brain power. And women have brains. They can reason. They can produce. They can create. They can be artists now. They can be businesswomen. They can be financiers. Is there room for improvement? Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that there's still discrimination that goes on. There's no doubt in my mind that there's still professions in which men look down at women, even though women are just as good as men. Finance is one of those professions. So, yeah, I think there's room to improvement. I don't think the government has a role in improving it. I don't need crazy, nutty intersectionality professors teaching us lessons about that. But yeah, all of us could make sure that we're not discriminating, that we're judging people based on their character, based on their ability in a particular job. I think there's a lot of racism still out there, much more than I ever expected. But even among people who don't consider themselves racist, when they look at certain people, we need to be aware and alert of that and use reason to overcome it. There's still an anti-woman slate. You can see that with the incels and MG whatever groups. Rob writes on Facebook, I'm going to read this in spite of it's not a super chat because it's so wrong. If you read history, most women didn't want to do those things. Who cares about most? Since when is most relevant? One woman wanted to do those things and was denied. That's one life. That's one immorality. That's a big deal. But how do we know that most women didn't want to do that? Yeah, it's like Greta. They were brainwashed that that's their role, that's what they should do. They never knew that these opportunities were possible to them. They were told from when they were tiny, they were supposed to take care of their husbands and live and be at home and not do all these things. And art was for men and only men. So, and now we think women have these instincts like an animal. They have to stay home and take care of the kids. I don't believe it. I don't believe that. That most women didn't want to. Most women were not provided with the opportunity. Most women were not allowed to think about that possibility. And when you read about women who tried to think outside of the box, just like Joan of Arc, they were burnt at the stake. They were ridiculed. They were treated like prostitutes. They weren't allowed to participate. They weren't allowed to follow and pursue their dreams. Most women didn't want to do that. If you don't know that such an option exists, yep, you're not going to want it. Knowledge matters. Knowledge matters. All right. What is a proper standard for having U.S. troops stationed overseas? I mean, the best thing there is to go read Winning the Unwinnable War that Ilan Journo edited and I wrote, because it's an extensive analysis and questions like that. But the quick one is, when it's necessary for the security of the United States, for the security of the lives and property of the Americans. So you should only place U.S. troops overseas when it's necessary to protect the life and property of Americans. 99% of the places where American troops exist today, they should not be there. And when they're deployed, they shouldn't be deployed for police action. They shouldn't be deployed to build democracies. They shouldn't be deployed to help our enemies, to hand them suitcases of cash. They should only be deployed to crush the enemy. To crush the enemy. So that would be the standard. Just one more thing about the women thing. It's an issue of morality. One form of injustice is wrong. And one form of injustice, a society that facilitates systematic injustice like that, is an immoral society. It's wrong. Women were discriminated against throughout history, even if it was just a few women. And that discrimination made it impossible for other women even to seek, to strive for other things, for anything else. Because those options were eliminated for them. As I said, government has no role in ending discrimination. It's you have a role in ending discrimination. You don't discriminate. Should federal public debt be allowed, or should government have a balanced budget every year? I mean, in an ideal society, debt should only be allowed in times of severe crisis like a war. But it should be banned. In the world in which we live in today, the issue is not primarily the debt. The issue is the spending. I don't want a balanced budget amendment today. I don't mind having one in a capitalist world. But today, it would be massively destructive, because the solution to government spending would be to raise taxes. It wouldn't be to cut spending. So I think, yes, we shouldn't have federal public debt in an ideal society except in emergencies. But that's for the capitalist world of the future. Today, it's too dangerous. All right, can you please give me advice? I'm scared to tell people things that will surprise them, good or bad. And it is causing me to be dishonest. I'm trying to purchase a chat, but it is not working. I'm not sure what that means. I'm trying to purchase a chat, but it is not working. What does that mean? I'm scared to tell people things that would surprise them. Why? The question is, why are you scared? I mean, you need to figure that out before you can solve anything, before you can address any kind of issue. You have to figure out what is it causing you to fear. Why do you care how they respond? Right? So I think that the main issue is figuring out what is the cause of the fear. And is it that they'll be disappointed in you? Is it that you can't handle them because it'll be an emotional response and you don't know how to? So once you identify the cause, then you can come up with strategies on how to deal with them. But you first have to identify the cause of it, the cause of the fear. And I'm not a psychologist. I find it harder. But the key element here is, I mean, sometimes you don't want to tell somebody something that's going to hurt them or that they're going to be disappointed in. And so, but the cost to you is dishonesty, and the cost to you is long-term damage to your cognitive faculty. The long-term cost to you is your ability to use your own cognitive faculty to be a reasoned human being. And that cost is way too high not to figure out what you're afraid of and how to overcome that fear. Being dishonest is crippling mentally. It cripples your cognitive ability. You're basically accepted. You basically accepted that when you're dishonest, when you lie to people, you basically accepted that facts don't matter, implicitly. And that has a profound impact on your psychology, on your ability of your subconscious and your ability to integrate information, because you've accepted the non-fact. You've accepted, for example, other people's emotions are important. And something like that can have disastrous consequences to how you think about a lot of things in life and how you pursue your own values in life. So it's incredibly destructive. We'll have to do a whole show on honesty, because I think I did a few years ago, maybe less than that, but all right. So I could say a lot more. Remind me about that topic. We'll deal with it a lot. It's a hot topic for me, but you have to figure it out, because it's life or death. It's a real life or death issue. If you're walking around lying to people because you're afraid of them, it's not good. It'll hurt you. All right. No more super chat question. I'll take this last. I've got two, and we'll end it there. The Trump administration is saying that Turkey told them, not asked, that they were sending 15,000 troops in, and the U.S. option was to send more troops in to fight or to leave. Comment. Well, that's not how it's being presented. And again, this isn't yesterday. This goes back to December, when Donald Trump, and this was well documented, had a phone call with Erdogan of Turkey. And Erdogan of Turkey told him that Turkey wants to go in, and told Trump that he needs to leave Syria. And he gave him the reason to leave Syria. You've defeated ISIS. Why are you still there? And Trump on the phone call said, yeah, you're right. Why are we still here? Okay, I agree. You can have Syria. We're going to leave. A country like Turkey is not going to invade Syria if it really thinks it's going to upset the U.S. It's a NATO member. It gets massive amounts of arms from the U.S. Russia is not very happy with them invading Syria. So it's not like they can turn to the Russians for help if the Americans come after Turkey. It's got a weak economy, weakened significantly over the last couple of years. If Trump really said, no, don't do it, and had some credibility behind the no, because I don't think he has any credibility anymore, but had some credibility behind the no. Don't do it. This is wrong. The United States will not support you. There will be consequences if you do it. I don't think Turkey would do it. I think Turkey basically took Trump saying, yeah, sure, I'll take the troops out, which happened in December. Then he kind of backtracked because Bolton was there to convince him not to do it. And then once he fired Bolton, there was nobody there to talk against it. And he just said, yeah, sure, why do we have troops there? Let's just take them out. And by the way, initially, they were going to withdraw 50 American troops. It was just 50 guys embedded with the Kurds, I think special forces. Now, they're withdrawing 1,000 American troops for the South. And it's not, again, like they're bringing them home. They're just withdrawing them for the South. Now, I don't want America to fight Turkey. I think that's absurd. I don't think America should go to war with Turkey. As I said last time, I think our whole policy with regarding the Middle East should be different. And I think we should be a lot more assertive and a lot clearer about what we should do. I don't think we should fight it, but I don't think we should be bullied by Turkey. We have the ability to tell them, no, don't do it. There will be horrific consequences to you if you do. But we didn't. We clearly Trump gave in to Erdogan. Clearly. Trump admires Erdogan. He admires Putin. He admires Xi of China. He admires authoritarians. He's not going to stand up to them. He hasn't stood up to a single one of them. I mean, look, his best buddy, he's got a bro, whatever, right, with the murderous dictator of North Korea. Now, I don't believe American troops need to be in Syria. I would have never sent American troops to Syria. I would have carpet bombed anywhere ISIS was, completely flattened the place, destroyed them completely, turned them into ashes, and then I would have turned to the real sources of the problem, Iran and Saudi Arabia. I've been talking about this only for, 18 years. So well documented what my views are here. But the idea that a third-rate country with a meager military force would bully the Americans and tell us where we should go, what troops we should have where, what we should do, is absurd. I mean, I can understand if somebody said, well, if Trump a year ago had withdrawn all troops from Syria, mission accomplished, we've defeated ISIS. Okay, but that's not what happened. Erdogan, in a sense, demanded that the U.S. take the troops out, and Donald Trump said, yeah, okay, we'll do that. Go ahead, kill our friends, kill our ally in Syria, kill the people who are actually imprisoning ISIS. So if you read the news, you know that many of the prisons in which ISIS was being held, they've escaped, and they're escaping. And some of them are going to give up, some of them are not going to rejoin ISIS, some of them will rejoin ISIS, some of them will go back to Europe. And 6 months from now, who knows what they'll do? Who knows what they'll do? But that's all thanks to the Turks going in there, and the Trump administration just saying, fine, go ahead. And now, because of the backlash, because Republicans are really upset with Trump, he's saying, oh, well, I guess we should have some economic sanctions against Syria because they did this. But that wasn't his intention. I mean, again, all of you can, it's stunning to me, the extent to which rational people are willing to bring about this convoluted notion of justifying and finding a rationale for anything Trump does. No, Trump does stupid things all the time. And only you can find a rationale for them because he can't. And he has none. Somebody says something about discrimination. Yeah, I'm not against discrimination if it's discrimination based on rational reasons. They're not good enough for the job. Then you discriminate against them. But discrimination that's not based on reason, which is most discrimination that's talked about, based on sexual orientation or based on color of skin or based on sex. For a job where none of that is relevant, is irrational and therefore immoral and therefore should be eliminated. Okay, this is the last question. Can you sell me an Ocon? What does it cost? I don't know what it costs. You're going to have to figure that out. You can go to the website. Just type in Ocon 2020. It's in Austin, Texas. and you can find the website and figure out the cost. I have no idea what it costs. As I've said many times, this is not an Ayn Rand Institute show. I am not involved in running the Ayn Rand Institute anymore. I don't know logistical things like that. Why you should go to OCON? Because it's fun. Because you'll have a good time and you'll learn a lot. Because you'll get to meet fabulous people who share your values and share your ideas, for the most part, I hope. And depending on who you are, of course. And you're going to hear some fabulous lectures from people who really know their stuff, who really can apply objectivism. And so you'll learn something while having a lot of fun and meeting some terrific people. You'll spend a week in the closest we have to Galt's Gulch in the world. Just surrounded by people where you don't have to apologize for what you think. You don't have to be afraid of telling them the truth. You don't have to hide. You can be yourself. Assuming you're a rational, good person, right? All right, everybody. Next show is tomorrow at 8 o'clock, and then I'll be off for a few days because I'm traveling. But I will be, where am I going next week? Toronto, Boston, and Connecticut. So I'll be in those states. No public events, but I'll be traveling through those places. So we'll do a show tomorrow, and then the next show will be next Saturday. As I said, I'll talk tomorrow about the wage productivity issue, and I'll talk tomorrow about the business roundtable, giving up on shareholder wealth maximization. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your weekend. Go watch some football or something. Maybe not football, maybe baseball. It's playoff season. Bye, everybody.